Welcome to episode 9 of The Culinary Citizen, a gastronomic guide to international relations. This is Sam Chappell-Sokol.
And Kelsey Marr. Each week, we introduce you to a concept or theme connecting food and people around the world. This week, we'd like to welcome JJ Harder, Deputy Cultural Attaché at the Embassy in Rabat, Morocco.
Hi, JJ.
Hi, Sam. Hi, Kelsey. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
As Kelsey said, JJ is the Deputy Cultural Attaché at U.S. Embassy in Rabat, Morocco. Among other things, cultural attachés build relationships with the host culture through academic, professional, and cultural exchanges and programs. JJ organized the first U.S.-Morocco Food Week this past year and hosted a chili cook-off recently in Fez, Morocco. Before working at the Moroccan Embassy, JJ worked at the U.S. Embassy in Peru, I believe, which, as we have mentioned before on the show, Peru is a country with a very progressive approach to culinary diplomacy. We are excited to talk to you, JJ, and find out more about your past history and your upcoming events.
Well, I love talking about food, so thanks for having me.
So, JJ, we'd love to learn a little bit more about your life as a cultural attaché. Can you describe your day-to-day work?
Sure. At a U.S. embassy, a cultural attaché is there to help build bridges. So, like Sam mentioned, there are exchanges where, in my case, we help facilitate travel for Moroccans to go back to the U.S. To learn more about the U.S. culture, and we also bring Americans over here to do different what we call programs. Different cultural. So day to day is hard to talk about, but in the year and a half that I've been in Morocco, we have had an astronaut that I took around on the Gravity tour, where we showed the movie Gravity subtitled into Moroccan Arabic, and we had the astronaut speak about her time going to space twice. And we had a rap group from Arkansas called Big Piff come, and we took to Morocco's conservative northeastern part of the country. I did U.S. Morocco Food Week. I've had jazz bands. I've had the first ever grant to a local ultimate Frisbee organization to do workshops. I mean, basically all up and down the spectrum. If it's food, culture, music, art, film, poetry, academia, science, technology, entrepreneurship, countering violent extremism, and interfaith dialogue. If it's culture, it's something we can get involved in, and I love it, actually.
That sounds fascinating, and yeah, that's an amazing gig, and it kind of reminds us of our first guest ever on the program is Paul Rockhauer, who's been leading a State Department program doing music, just specifically music cultural diplomacy throughout the world for the past year. So yeah, we could definitely touch on the music, the relationship between music and food and cultural diplomacy. How did that experience with, do you say Big Piff? How did that go?
Yeah, it was kind of a learning experience because this is part of the country to which I had not been. Part of the country we hadn't really done too many activities in for quite a while, actually. And it's kind of remote, some of the places. And it was also in the middle of winter. So winter here is not exactly winter in Nebraska, where I'm from. Winter here is like 50 degrees. But 50 degrees here is free for people. So when we're having a concert, when the sun's down at 7 o'clock, even though it's free, even though it's in the middle of the city, it was hard to get people out. So I think I learned a few things about how to organize these musical tours, because we've done about 4 or 5 of them in the year and a half I've been here. So it still was a lot of fun. And I think the important thing to remember is that when we have these like cultural activities, it's not like we are condescendingly, paternalistically coming in with our superior culture and allowing locals to experience it. It's totally a two-way street. And so I had some of these guys from Arkansas had never left the country before, never left the U.S., and so their minds were totally open, and totally they seeing women wearing hijab and hearing the azan and even eating shawarma, shawarma is not a Moroccan thing, but the best shawarma I've had in the country, actually, was up there in a small town. So, that's what it's about.
What's shawarma?
Say again?
Sorry, what's shawarma for our listeners and for ourselves?
Shawarma. So shawarma or shawarma, depending on your pronunciation. Mm-hmm. I lived in Syria for years, so that's how I say it.
I understand. Thank you so much for elucidating for us. So that was the first time that your Arkansas musicians had shawarma.
Yeah, that's the first time they had either. Yeah.
Right. Got it. Is music a bigger focus than food in the past year and a half that you've been working in Morocco? Have there been more in terms of cultural exchange?
I mean, just for your understanding, you got to look at what the U.S. does compared to other countries. The UK government has a thing called the British Council. The Spaniards have the Cervantes, the Germans have the Goethe, and the French have the Institut Français. So these are all kind of like cultural houses where people can learn about the language and the culture. Maybe they show films. We don't really have anything like that writ large as a U.S. government. The U.S. State Department does operate a few standalone cultural houses. One of them's in Jerusalem. I know there's one in Amal in Indonesia. There's also one in Casablanca, Morocco's largest city, just 50 miles to the south. It's called Dar America. But we really don't have anything like that. So all the programming that we're going to do is going to, instead of taking place at like a standalone facility where people, like a known place, a known quantity where people can just go, they've got a library and computers and that kind of stuff. They know they're going to go for the Cervantes, they're going to show Spanish films and they're going to see flamenco performances or whatever. We don't really have that. So we have to do all that stuff out in the communities, which in some ways is better because we partner. We don't do anything on our own. We're not like an independent operator here going around Morocco doing anything we want. Everything 100% has to be with a good local partner in the villages, in the cities, in the mix. And that's where we go and do our activities. So traditionally, these activities tend to be more things like music and film and visual arts. And I think what you're seeing now is slowly but surely, vis-a-vis food, thanks to Peru, thanks to Korea, thanks to Turkey, thanks to Mexico, I think you're seeing the U.S. government start to like wise up and see how food can be harnessed. You know, call it culinary diplomacy, call it gastro diplomacy, call it food diplomacy, call it what you want. But you know, seeing how we can connect people to people over food. And for my money, sometimes you don't like the same music, like jazz, for example. It's an American thing. It's great. I grew up playing jazz, and a lot of people in the world like jazz, but not everybody in the world likes jazz. And you can go in almost every domain and see something like that. Well, yes and no, yes and no. But food is the thing that we all do all across the world every day, and it always brings a smile to people's faces. This is the way to connect. So it's a slow process, but I think the U.S. government is finally starting to get it.
Yeah, we've seen that reflected in the State Department's new program, which we've discussed on this program before, the Culinary Diplomacy Partnership Initiative. And yeah, from stories like yours and learning from other governments, learning from Korea, as you say, learning from Peru, the U.S. is really taking on a new tack. Can you tell us a little bit about your own background in food and why this is something that interests you and why you're excited about engaging in this way in cultural diplomacy?
Well, full disclosure, I come from a not very high socioeconomic background of just random family in the state of Nebraska, and single mom, so who had to work 2 jobs her whole life, my whole childhood. So I grew up eating pizza rolls and bagel bites, and I was a latchkey kid. And most of my family is obese. It's America, where everybody drives and everybody eats huge portions. My father, actually, who I only met a few years ago, he wasn't around, like I said, was from Iran. I guess I have a few different genes than the rest of the people in my family, but I also have an idea planted in my head from the time I could first understand what my mom was saying, that your father is from this, far-flung location. And so I think between the really poor nutrition I had growing up, coupled with like this thing bouncing around in my head that it's kind of exotic and Eastern and, I don't know, that I was kind of sent on a path to all things outside the United States. I did Peace Corps in Bolivia, and I learned Arabic in Syria, and then I joined the State Department, and I've had the pleasure I lived in Peru as a vice consul, and then in Syria I was press attaché, and then I worked in Washington, and now I'm here. I think my childhood is really the most important thing, but I could tell you one story about college. In college, I was an opinion editor at the paper, And I was also working as a TV reporter because I studied journalism. So I was a TV reporter, videographer, anything at this station in Lincoln. And it was the two closest restaurants to it were Boston Market and Fazoli's. And I'm sure you've probably heard of Boston Market. Fazoli's, I don't know if you have, but it's an American chain. And if you're trying to get sponsors, so I won't disparage it too much, but it's kind of a restaurant that it's not Italian. It's more like Americans would say Italian. It's like totally Italian-American, America's own thing on what Italian food is, and it's not delicious. But people at this station where I was a videographer, people would go in every day. It was either Boston Market or Fazoli's, Boston Market or Fazoli's. And so I said, all right, I'm done with this. I'm not going to eat at any restaurant I've been to before in town till I've gone to every restaurant. I did make an exception for Papa John's because it was college. It took me 1 year, and Lincoln, Nebraska, is where the University of Nebraska is. It's about 250,000 people, not a huge town. But it took me about a year, about 300 restaurants. And so when I finished, people at the paper were like, well, you know what, we really need somebody to be a food critic, but we don't know who should do it. I mean, you're easily, far and away, the most equipped given your experience. So I became the food critic. And now it wasn't like I was taking over for Mark Bittman there at the Daily Nebraskan, God love it, but it was still the second largest readership in the state, and actually a great paper, still is. That set me on a path that I guess why I'm here today. I was the food critic for a number of years, and I got to have a lot of cool experiences that way too.
Are there any reviews that we should look up and highlight that you are especially proud of or especially ashamed about from your days at the Daily Nebraskan?
Oh man, I really walked myself into that one, didn't I? Just remember I was a young kid, and I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing, but I especially didn't know then. Yeah, actually, I would say about every 6 months someone Facebooks me because they're in the bathroom of a restaurant called The Oven in Lincoln, which is my favorite Indian restaurant in the world and one of the premier fine dining and wine restaurants in the state of Nebraska. And because on the wall in the bathroom is one of my pieces about the best places to go for a date. And of course, the Oven was number one. And so they have it framed and it's in the bathroom. And, every time I go back once a year and I always see Nyawang, the owner, and I say hi. But, inevitably some friend of mine goes in for a date and they see the thing on the wall in the bathroom and they take a photo of it or message me. So I did a lot of reviews over the course of my time there. Probably the one of which I'm proudest wasn't on food specifically, but actually more specific was beer. There's another restaurant in Lincoln. I'm giving a lot of plugs for Lincoln tonight. Yaya's. It's the best pizza in the state of Nebraska and probably one of the best beer destinations too. So they have 200, 300, 400 beers. I mean, I don't know. They probably had over the course of the years, they may have had, 600 or 800 beers in there. Anyway, so I wanted my final piece for the Daily Nebraskan to be having tried every beer at Yaya's. And
wow.
that took a long time. And so at this point, I've had over 1,000 beers in my life. And that was kind of a slog, and expensive too. Cause I was I was at college, I was a grad student.
You couldn't write that up. The Nebraskan budget wouldn't pay for that.
Oh no, this was, the booze was on my own, but I'd take my friends in, I'd be like, all right, beers on me. And we'd get 6 beers just so I could try each one, and we're not talking like Heineken. I'm talking about, Rogue Imperial Stout, like obscure, like expensive, large format beers. But I mean, it really was a fantastic experience from going to cover chain restaurants that came in that I could just totally rip to shreds and with no pushback, and all the way to, the best fine dining locations and that beer one, which was really the coup de grace for me.
Well, can you give us a description of your project that you did in Morocco, the U.S. Morocco Food Week?
Sure. So U.S. Morocco Food Week had never been done before. I don't think actually any food, culinary, gastro programming had ever been done before on the part of the U.S. mission. So the mission will include U.S. Embassy Rabat and Consulate Casablanca. We kind of started from scratch, and I didn't want to go after Thomas Keller right away because it's a very, very, very different food scene here than, like, let's take Peru, for example, and which is an important, I can talk more about that later, but the food scene here is not as developed as many countries in the world. And so they're not going to be ready to appreciate maybe a chef, a 3 Michelin star chef. So what I wanted to do was start very small. So what we did was over the course of about 6 months, I made contacts in food. I met the chefs who did Master Chef Morocco on TV. I met Shomisha, who was like the Martha Stewart of Morocco, I guess you could say. And I went to all the small NGOs that have culinary schools. I went to one of my favorite places in the whole country. You guys have to come. It's called Amal Women's Training Center. And what they do is they offer a place for disadvantaged women, single moms, which is edgy here, and other like disadvantaged, marginalized women. And they bring them in through a very rigorous 9-month culinary training course. And they have a restaurant as well where you can eat for like fantastic meals for like $9. So we made the contacts there, and they're a very good partner of the embassy. And I even went to a couple of the places where Anthony Bourdain had gone when he came. So I made these contacts little by little, and it kind of coalesced. And it pushed our boundaries because we had never done anything like that before. And my staff, great staff, but they were skeptical. They were really skeptical. And I think that's what you can see in this program is that the U.S., the one thing we have that we do the best of any country in the world is, I'll use the words of actually Vice President Biden when he came to Morocco in 2014. He said, a skepticism of conformity. And I don't know why it hit me. Usually when our politicians talk, it connects with us to a certain degree, but honestly, it doesn't really hit you. And this one really hit me because we are all colors. We are all religions, or no religions, or no colors, or we're men and we're women, where some of us are in wheelchairs, we have all sorts of different kinds of people in the US, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different orientations. What really brings us together? I think that's really it, a skepticism of conformity. And you see that in our food. That's why we have Fazoli's, God love it, it's Italian American, it's not Italian. We also have Mexican American, we have Chinese American, and we create totally different things. We don't just do what everybody always did, right? So Morocco is not like that. Morocco has conformity, and there's not a lot of skepticism. So it really pushed our boundaries. But I can tell you what we did, basically front to back. We brought a chef, a guy I know from Nebraska. I invited him with support from the embassy because I think his story was really, really good for Morocco. It's a guy who went to college, dropped out, then he decided to go to culinary school, and so he was in Seattle, went to good school, worked in a lot of great restaurants, came back to Nebraska and opened a food truck in January, which is, like I told him, the worst idea I've ever heard. Nebraska's freezing, and nobody eats in January because they spend all their money at Christmas and New Year's, right? So, but he did it, and he killed it. I mean, we're not talking Portland or DC or LA or wherever. It's not the Kogi of Nebraska, but he did a great job. And then so he built that into kind of a little mini empire where he started a gourmet burger restaurant, and then he started a high-end Spanish tapas, Mediterranean tapas restaurant. And now he's just doing, he's one of these chefs that he's just always doing different stuff. He started a sandwich shop and a bakery and a taco place. Anyway, I think it was a perfect story for Morocco because it highlights creativity and stick-to-itiveness and entrepreneurship. He started his whole career from a food truck in Nebraska in January. So we brought him as our guest. And I worked with him to develop a menu that would work for Morocco, that was not edgy. I mean, no foam, no sous vide. No, that's not the kind of thing that we were trying to do here. The menu for all the different culinary schools and cooking clubs and catering classes we went to was chicken and dumplings, biscuits and gravy, and the Reuben sandwich, which I can wax poetic about the Reuben, which I believe is America's greatest sandwich, and it was created in 1928 in the Blackstone Hotel in Omaha, Nebraska.
Wow, there's some history I didn't know.
Yeah, I won't go on. I'll save you the time. But we, it was really, it was edgy to plan for us, and it was difficult to actually implement. When I'm sitting in the culinary school in Saleh, great partners, but the facility they have was not stellar. Like very, very, very rudimentary cooking equipment. That was difficult. And the students are excited, and they're there, and they're just, they're totally interested in what Chef Eric Hustad was going to do. But then they try it, and the biscuits and gravy we made, we used merguez sausage. Merguez is a sausage that sometimes people think is French. It originated in North Africa, and its name is from Spanish, but
like a spicy lamb sausage, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's spicy and it's earthy sausage. Pork, because it's a Muslim majority country, it can be found here, but is certainly not used in cooking. I certainly wasn't going to do that at a culinary school because the vast majority of people don't eat pork. So we audibled and we used merguez, and that obviously changed the makeup of the biscuits and gravy. But they tried it, and almost all the students, to a man, said, it's good, but it's really salty. So this is one thing you need to know about Morocco. One thing you need to know about Morocco is that sugar is king here. King. When you have their tea, which is all imported green Chinese tea, they put a lot of sugar in it. So even when you go to a restaurant or whatever and say no sugar, that just means half sugar, because they're thinking, well, you're insane if you don't like sugar in your tea. So I'm sure you've had some Moroccan dishes before, but they do a great job of incorporating sweetness into their mains, what we would traditionally, think of as mains. So they have a thing called a tagine, which is just a cooking vessel, but it's also, like, we use the word casserole for the cooking vessel and the dish that we eat. Tagine lahm barqouq. It's lamb or beef and prunes. Very sweet. Or
sweetened with honey as well as the prunes.
Definitely sweetened. I mean, they can use sugar or honey. Sugar, really, Morocco's a fantastic country vis-a-vis what they can grow here, because they grow everything. It's a self-sustainable country, food-wise, except for sugar and green tea, I think, which is, they're like the world's leading consumer of sugar, I think, per person, and the tea as well. They're really off the charts on those. But that's really a sweet dish. Or then you've heard of couscous. They call it usksu, and they make it traditionally on Fridays. And they'll put the couscous and then the very, very, very boiled vegetables on top with either the meat or the chicken. And they put on top something called tfaya, which is a dish of caramelized onions and raisins. Very sweet. Anyway, so they have a tradition of eating a lot of sweet food here. So our biscuits and gravy came off as extremely salty. The final thing we did of Food Week was kind of a take on Iron Chef, a take on Master Chef. I had my chef, Chef Eric Hustad, against Chef Halima Mourid, who was that year's champion of Master Chef Morocco.
Wow. And
we were right on the river Bouregreg in the middle of Rabat, right next to the river, had a huge stage set up and had a really famous person come be our MC. And we had a panel of Chef Moha, who is one of the best chefs in the country, a Moroccan who's doing innovative stuff, innovative yet with traditional flavors, from Marrakesh. And I had Sarah Robin, who was the owner of Marco, which is a great restaurant in Saleh. And I had my ambassador up there, Ambassador Dwight Bush. And so that was our panel. And so I gave the same products to both Chef Eric and Chef Halima, and they had an hour to cook. And it was open to the public, and we had thousands of people. It was really festive environment. And so they cooked their meals, and then the panel tasted them. And everybody on the panel, except for Ambassador Bush, said what Eric cooked was salty. It's a very cultural thing, and I don't think people realize it. And what's even funnier, I guess ironic, is that Americans are famous for liking sweet food. If you talk to a European or an Australian or New Zealand or whatever, But we've got nothing on the Moroccans. They really know how to incorporate and appreciate sugar.
And is the
So
I'm curious about the sensory brief aside about the sensory perception is that dish is salty because it's not sweet. It's not to you it didn't taste salty, but the biscuits and gravy it just lacked sugar, which made it taste saltier to somebody who's accustomed to having a lot more sugar in their dishes, in their savory dishes. Is that what I'm to understand?
well, I think I'm a little ignorant about it. I don't exactly understand it. We can make it a spectrum of sugar to salty, or we can make a different spectrum of salty to unsalty.
Right.
What I think that where the difference is going to come in where is in chefs in the U.S. realize that salt helps bring out the flavors of a dish,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not. Except for we're talking a lot of Americans just put a ton of salt on stuff, you know, on their plates when at the table or whatever. It's not looking for a saltiness, right?
Right.
So I do think it's the absence of the sugar more than anything than
Right.
the explicit overuse of salt.
That would be a fascinating map of the world. The each nation or cuisines, which of the five tastes is most prevalent in that.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's umami, whether it's bitter, whether it's salty, whether it's sweet. I don't know. I think that would be like I think Thai food is very sour, for example.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's work on that map. Let's see
Let's
that
work on
from the Culinary Citizen.
Sure.
It can be your first product that you can ship around the world. I'll buy it for my wall. I love maps.
Perfect.
Great.
We'll make T-shirts too.
Well, I can tell you a few more things about what I did during Food Week.
Would love to hear that.
Sure.
So, again, like one important thing is that it's not us just bestowing our culture on the world. It's a two-way street. So when Chef Eric went to Tangier, we gathered a group of women who were in the catering class, and he taught them how to make chicken and dumplings, which they totally loved. They didn't think it was too salty. They totally loved it. But then right after we did that, we made a dish. They made a dish, the women themselves, called tagia, and it uses tagine, which is a clay cooking vessel base, and then it's olive oil layered with thinly sliced potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, parsley, spicy peppers, and either sardines or anchovy or whitebait. And the cool thing about it, especially for Chef Eric's perspective, is that they didn't use an oven in the house where we were. Houses often don't have ovens. In the old city of Tangier and many old cities around Morocco, there is one or multiple community ovens. They call it farran. And it's for me, the cool thing is that it's always right next to a hammam or a traditional bathhouse too. So basically in the basement, you've got a very hot quasi-Neapolitan oven that's blazing all day. And right above it, that's where half the day men can go bathe and the other half the day women can go bathe. So it's, it's holistic.
Genius.
Yeah, no, but I'm surprised it doesn't exist everywhere in the world. They figured it out. They got it right here. So the women made the tagia, and then Eric and I walked it over to the farran, and you put it in and you tell him, how long you want it to be cooked. And then he charges you by the half hour, basically. I mean, it's a fantastic thing. And Eric just loved it. So we did the catering class. We did a cooking club in Fez. There is a place in Fez called the American Language Center, and they have a cooking club. And we did something a little non-traditional there. We didn't cook, but I took Eric to give a PowerPoint presentation basically on his career, because one of the goals of Food Week was to encourage people to not just be creative with food, but to be creative entrepreneurially with food. Here in Morocco, we have very few restaurants. And the restaurants we have can generally be divided into a few categories. Cheap fast food snacks, they're called snack. Very high-end, French usually, sometimes Spanish and Italian, American, I guess. And tourist restaurants, which are not necessarily high-end. You might be charged high-end, but the food is Moroccan-ish and not necessarily representative of all that Morocco can offer. So, and then looking at those restaurants, almost all of the people cooking are men, whereas almost all of the people cooking in Morocco, counting the homes, are women. The difference between Morocco and maybe Japan, France, the United States, is that in all those other countries, if you want the best cuisine, you go to restaurants. I mean, of course, there's fantastic food in homes. There are great chefs. And then, of course, there are supper clubs and stuff now that's trendy. But the best food in most of the industrialized world can be found in restaurants. And more women are thankfully getting those high-end chef jobs. But in Morocco, it's not like that. In Morocco, the best food is in homes. And people here rave and rave and rave about their cooking. And I say, I would love to enjoy that cooking, but I can't. Or maybe I can because I live here and I have lots of Moroccan friends. But your average tourist from the US or France or whatever to Morocco doesn't get to experience that. He gets to experience a really inferior product. And Moroccans don't know because Moroccans don't go out to eat at Moroccan restaurants. So this is something that we wanted to work on. This is why the cooking club, we said, listen, you can be creative with food. You can be creative in coming up with a business idea like a food truck, or a stand, or even a food festival, or a full-on restaurant, or a baking business, what have you. But you can be creative and you can market something innovative to Moroccans themselves. So that's really one of the things we were trying to do with Food Week, specifically in the cooking club.
Do you think that something like supper clubs would have a space if there's such amazing home cooking and such? I think I've been to Morocco. I think there's a lot of people who like traveling. Morocco is a very interesting, warm place to go visit. But yeah, in order to get the real food, do you think part of the entrepreneurship could be starting something like a supper club?
I absolutely think so. Actually, I suggested one. I might start one myself, not with me as the chef, but with guest chefs.
Right.
So perfect timing for you guys. I was just down in Marrakesh for the Art Biennale. And there's a chef at a place there, at a restaurant called Salt in a Riyadh, a little boutique hotel called Dar les Cigognes. Her name is Najat Kanash. And I hadn't met her before or heard of her, but my friend Amanda Moutaki, who is the #1 food blogger in Morocco, you should look into her. It's Maroc Mama, M-A-R-O-C Mama. She's an American Moroccan. Introduced me to Najat. And Najat, it turns out, worked at, and I've told a lot of people about this since I've met her. I'm going to list 5 restaurants, and you guys are going to know what I'm talking about. El Bougie, Noma, Alinea, Per Se, and the French Laundry.
Wow.
I've never heard of anybody who worked at all 5.
Yeah, that's like some sort of
it's a unicorn.
Creme de la creme.
Yeah.
So Najat is ethnically Moroccan, was born in San Sebastian, Spain, and she's there doing a pop-up for 1 month. And so I was fortunate enough to spend 2 hours in her kitchen trying rabbit bastila, and then she really got into the molecular gastronomy, which is her, of course, because she was.
I mean, if you've been at those restaurants, then that's what you're
with Adria and those guys. So it was a fantastic experience, and so immediately I told all my friends in Marrakesh about it because I invited her up here, and I said I can get a great table of 10 people for kind of a dinner party, but you just tell me how much you need, and I'll get the people. You cook whatever you want. I know I can do that with 10 people in Rabat. But can I do it with 100 people in Rabat every month? It's very difficult. Again, or even Rabat, for what it's worth, I think it's the sleepiest or most provincial capital in the world. I've been to 103 countries, and it's the capital, but it's a town that at 9 p.m., you're in home. There are very few restaurants, bars, cafes, and it's a place where you entertain at home. So it could work here. That's just me. That's just bouncing around my head, is the idea of doing a supper club. I have some other friends who started an NGO that's Syrian Supper Club. I lived for years in Syria, like I mentioned before, and the Syrian Supper Club is an NGO that encourages people to start their own supper clubs where they cook Syrian cuisine, and the proceeds back to the NGO to be distributed to those in need in Syria. Even though 4.5 million Syrians have now left the country, there are still 15 million, a lot of whom are having a difficult time. So supper clubs are a cool thing because they're different, but they can also be harnessed in a different way, and they can allow us to be philanthropical and connected to the food in a different way. So yeah, maybe we'll do one here.
Yeah, we spoke with a guy, Philip Champagne, a couple months ago now, who's done some supper clubs in London with International Alert, with the peace building NGO. They highlighted definitely Syrian cuisine, Afghan cuisine, a couple of other cuisines in order to raise money and raise awareness. And it was kind of an educational tool to learn to teach the London public, the British public, about the refugee situation. So definitely huge amount of power in that outside of the restaurant sphere, outside of the restaurant space, because it's very intentional. You're bringing people together intentionally, and you can, talk about what you want to talk about. So I encourage you to do it. Go for it.
Hopefully, yeah. There's also another pop-up in the Marrakesh. It was Courtney, the chef owner of Tartine in San Francisco. Yeah, she was here she did 5 nights at a place called Cafe Nomad, which is one of the premier culinary destinations in the Medina, the old city of Marrakesh. Yeah. So actually, I hung out with her drinking scotch every night I was in Marrakesh too.
That's pretty random. So this is a good time to take a quick break as we think a little bit about Bar Tartine's amazing smoked potatoes with black garlic and ramp aioli. After that, we'll get back and chat more with JJ about his prior experience in Peru and more.
Welcome back to The Culinary Citizen. We're here today with JJ Harder, Deputy Cultural Attaché at the Embassy in Rabat, Morocco. And we were just going to talk about your experience in Peru and your thoughts about the Peruvian foodscape. What did you notice there?
I think Americans have a tendency to wax nostalgic and wish they grew up in a different time, say the Roaring 20s or the 50s. I think I got to be in a place that was that special at the right time with the right people. I was in Peru 2008 to 2010, before Peru was Peru in the way it is in your mind. And it was amazing. I don't think I even knew what I had then. But, I would go to Gaston Acurio's restaurant, La Mar. It was the closest restaurant to my house, actually. It was 2 blocks away. And I would just go there for lunch on Saturdays. And I mean, just even now, I'm kind of getting teary-eyed, which is kind of lame, but it's like, it's nostalgia and everything. I didn't know what I had. But I did. Like, it was such a crazy, awesome time to be there, because Peru then and now, even more so now, is just totally off the charts. And what they bring to the table in Peru is topography. And that's what people don't understand, the geography of Peru. It's the reason Peruvian food is so amazing is because they have jungle, they have mountains, they have desert, and they have coast. They have fertile plains, and they've got tubers that you've never seen that are called puma's paw, and they have weird fruits like camu camu that you've never heard of. And you have people groups that are different. So the people in the jungle people it's not like a tribe. It's just different people. The people on the coast, a different kind of tribe, not in a paternalistic way, but tribe like people in the Midwest and Nebraska are a tribe. People in the mountains there are multiple different people groups, and they all have their microcultures around these different foods and the different altitudes and the different climates they have there. And in Lima, in the capital, you've got money because of mining, and you have it's the political capital, but it's like one of these South American countries that it's the political media capital in one, right? So you've got anybody who's going big is in Lima, and so you can have this restaurant scene because there's the money and the investors for it and the people who can go there. And you've got all these different people coming from all over the country, which is 3 times as big as California. It's a massive country, bringing all their different foods and their loves for Juanes, from the people from the jungle, or the people who come from like Arequipa, where they will eat dried llama and alpaca, and and the people on the coast who just love seafood, obviously. And you just get some amazing food. I mean, my mouth's watering right now. Here it's 8:45 in the morning where I am. I'm would die, just totally die for concha alla parmesana, scallops with olive oil and parmesan on the broiled. I mean, I can literally think of 25 dishes that I would right now drive 3 hours for if I could have them. That's what was happening in Peru. That's what is happening in Peru. But that's the culture that starts from the ground up of people saying yes, saying why not, saying sure, let's put those things together. Sure, let's try that. What's the worst that could happen? And so you get a dynamic cuisine and a dynamic restaurant scene that's being recognized now around the world. I mean, on the top 50 list, I think 3 were from Peru. I was like, oh, I would just go to those places. I didn't, there wasn't like a 2-month wait or anything. This wasn't, I'm not talking about the French Laundry. I would just go. And now there's 3 of the top restaurants in the world. I mean, it's amazing. So a lot of it's due to Gaston Acurio and what he did. He's a real, ambassador for Peruvian cuisine. But a lot of it's due to the Peruvian government. And I totally tip my hat to them because they recognized it at the right time and they put the right resources and they got the right people behind it. And I know we can do that as a U.S. government as well. We're not there yet, but there are like-minded individuals, I think, like me, who are pushing from the ground up. So with Peru, I was fortunate enough to bring James Beard Award-winning chef Debbie Gold from Kansas City. And she'd worked with Charlie Trotter. She'd worked in France. She's definitely cut her teeth. So she came over and we worked basically to do one of the other things we like to do with Food Weeks is you work on U.S. exports because U.S. has a lot of great food products. And the things we were trying to sell down there were American beef products, but not your traditional ribeye and T-bone. We were selling cheek and tongue, stuff like that. If you're not a vegetarian and you know what's going on, some of the most delicious parts of that animal. And Debbie knew how to cook them. She knows how to cook them. I'm talking to her about coming over to Morocco as well, actually. And so we went to culinary schools there, which are very top notch. Unlike Morocco, if you're going to go to culinary school, you're probably going to go to France, Switzerland, Canada, or the US. But in Peru, I mean, there's a cordon bleu there. I have friends who graduated from the culinary schools there who totally have the chops. Like, it's cheaper to stay there, and especially with the food products, it's amazing. So we went to these schools, and they were overjoyed to have her, and they're ready. In Peru, they just were totally interested in whatever ideas you could come up with, and it was just so invigorating to be in such a pro-idea, pro-experimentation society.
To bring back a phrase you gave us earlier, would you say there's that kind of skepticism of conformity, or is it less conscious skepticism of conformity and more enthusiasm about experimentation? Like, is there a difference between the American food scene where there is a skepticism of conformity versus the Moroccan food scene where there's a lot of conformity versus the Peruvian food scene where there's just a lot of innovation, excitement, and like new ideas just kind of popping out of the fact that there are so many different ingredients and vastly different topography and many different peoples all contributing to innovation?
I think it is that clash, and clash is kind of an aggressive word, but clash of products and peoples. Peru has at least 100,000 ethnic Chinese, largely from Fujian, I think, in the southeast Canton region, and at least 100,000 Japanese Peruvians as well. And you get a real Chinatown in Lima, not like a fake Chinatown like a lot of cities have, but it's a real Chinatown with real Chinese people, and you can get real Chinese food. And so when you get this clash, when you get people bumping up against each other, it's almost like you can't help but put new combinations together. Not because you're a wild, mad scientist and you love just fusion, which is a kind of dirty word, right? I mean, it has baggage, but just because you can't help it. You can't help from try new things. When you see your neighbor, eating dumplings, you take the dumpling and you use the stuff that you have there that's local, you know?
Is it normal, JJ, for embassies to have food weeks, or is this a program that you're kind of developing wherever you go?
I think I can say in all honesty that it is not a top-down mandate from, Secretary Kerry is not telling us, go do Food Week, young man. No, they're not doing that. But there is, because of the diplomatic culinary partnership and our stellar staff back in Washington there, that's been able to harness a bunch of the best chefs of the U.S. and a bunch of the best culinary diplomacy programming ideas, that there is a growing base for it. We're not going to pretend that this is a strategic priority like countering violent extremism is. No, or this year, climate change, or this year, entrepreneurship. It's not at that level. But I think it's important because it can be harnessed. It can be used to accomplish these other priorities in so many different ways, right? I'm not just talking about food. I'm talking about the entrepreneurial aspects of the restaurant business, which we have a really good experience in that. Chain restaurants, we're definitely the world leader in that. And that's obviously much to many people's chagrin because of the poor quality of so many of the restaurants. But it's a double-edged sword because that's successful entrepreneurship. The Chipotle and the Olive Garden and McDonald's and whatever restaurant you can think of. It's
Boston Market.
Boston Market, Fazoli's. I don't know if they're still around. I've been out of the U.S. for a while, but we can talk to people about entrepreneurship via food. And when it comes to U.S. exports and encouraging more trade and growing our economy, we can talk about the export of food. The Moroccan authorities don't accept U.S. beef right now. Be a great thing to have come in to Morocco. Working on that. And a lot of other products. This year, for what I hope can be the second annual U.S. Morocco Food Week, I'm really interested in U.S. beer and cheese. Cheeses here are fantastic. Cheddar, and they're kind of like country cheese they call jibben, just world class. Easily the best cheese producer in Middle East, North Africa, in my opinion. And they also have a great tradition of cheese because of the French who were here so long and the Spanish who were here. But they don't have a tradition of eating American cheeses at all. I mean, there is a quote unquote cheddar that you can get at some of the restaurant supermarkets, but it is not some artisanal, delicious Vermont Sharp, let me tell you. So that's something we can accomplish there. And another thing is women's rights. Morocco is a country that is open. It's a country that has a type of moderate Islam that is not necessarily found in the rest of the Middle East, and it's really encouraging. But at the same time, we can't pretend that the public space is as open to women as it is in most countries of the world, or most countries of the West, I should say, or how much the United States or maybe the United Nations would like it to be. You don't see the women in the cafes. You don't see the women as the chefs. And we would love to see more women being empowered, and especially girls too. And so that's why I think for this year, I'm really interested in bringing a female chef. I can't give away too many details because, I knock on wood, I don't want it to fall apart. But I've got a really exciting chef hopefully coming this year. A woman, because we have some of the most amazing female chefs in the world.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that and to see who you bring. Any other programming highlights that you can share at this point, or do we have to wait to check the Facebook feed as it comes out?
Well, I'll give you guys a shout out ahead of time, but I think there are two things that I did last year that we should probably mention, and we'll be able to build on those and do things that are similar but obviously different this year. Far and away, the biggest hit of a Facebook post we've ever had is a video we did with Ambassador Bush and Chef Khadija Ben Sdira, who is kind of the ambassador of Moroccan cooking to the world, a very, very well-known in Morocco chef. We had for Ramadan, which is the holy month they celebrate, the Muslims celebrate every year because it's the month in which the Holy Quran was given to them. It's a fasting month, and so there's fasting that happens during the daylight hours. The eating goes on in the nighttime, and every Muslim majority country has some pretty cool traditions about that. So what we did for this post is just a simple video. I'm not going to pretend it's like amazing, but just a simple video where we had Chef Khadija go to Villa America, which is Ambassador Bush's residence, and teach him how to cook, at his request, his 2 favorite Ramadan dishes, which were harira, which is a soup, and briwat, which is an appetizer. And this Facebook post totally killed it. I mean, just killed it. Like, it killed everything we've ever done before. And I think it just shows that people are connecting over food because they're proud of their food. Those harira and briwat, they are Moroccan. They're Moroccan as the flag, as the king. You know, they're as Moroccan as the old city of Marrakesh. And they're proud of them. And they're so pleased to see the ambassador excitedly and humbly standing next to this Moroccan chef, learning. And I mean, just waiting, you know, with bated breath to figure out what the next move was. And he was totally in it. Ambassador Bush is a great guy, a great supporter of food and culinary diplomacy, you know. And that one was just a great experience. And I think we're going to do something similar, like I said, but yet different this year. And the other thing I wanted to mention was when I was invited back to the cooking club. So I mentioned that Chef Eric and I went to the American Language Center Fez cooking club, and he gave a presentation. Frankly, they were upset because it's a cooking club and they wanted to cook, or they at least wanted to eat. And since he didn't cook, I said, listen, guys, I'm going to come back and I'm going to cook for you. And I didn't tell him what, because I was just being spontaneous. But I also said, I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you a presentation on American foods, because I was blown away when, well, I wasn't blown away. I was just upset when Chef Eric talked about his gourmet burger restaurant. And I mean, when it comes to burgers, I was a little bit ambivalent, because burgers around the world are seen as American, and they are probably American, and they can be delicious. And, you know, everybody just really gets hungry for a burger sometimes. But also, it seems to swallow up every other food we've ever created. And it's like, all we have is burgers.
It's the burger hegemony of America, something like
that. And so Eric's restaurant, Honest Abe's in Lincoln, Nebraska, won the award for best burger in a college town. Like, it's a legit place, right? And it's some delicious burgers. And he's always experimenting, has new ones. He had a cool Moroccan one he had on the menu when he got back. But we talked about burgers, because he has one of his restaurants burgers. And people were like, well, of course you have burgers, because that's the kind of food you eat. You don't eat anything else. And I was like, whoa. Let's just slow it down there. For example, have you guys ever heard of chopino? And I'm like, oh, no, I don't know what that is. Like, oh, okay. Have you ever heard of jambalaya? Like, no. Like, do you know what wild rice is? It's not really rice. Like, no, I don't. What about New York cheesecake? What about teppanyaki? What about fortune cookie? What about the egg roll? What about shoe fly pie? Anyway, I'm getting fired up about this right now just thinking about it, because we have an amazing, varied, broad, deep, delicious cuisine. And Americans are not proud of it like the Moroccans are, like the Peruvians are. We don't have the coherent whole of a cuisine, maybe necessarily like the Italians do. But even they have a cuisine that's all over the place. They've got everything. So anyway, I said, I'm going to come back and I'm going to cook for you. Fine, whatever. You can eat. I'll feed you. But I'm also going to give you a presentation. And so it took me a long time, because I've done research on this quite a bit. I've looked into studying culinary anthropology, actually, as a degree. But I've developed a presentation on foods that are from the United States. And there's 100 slides of delicious photos that just made everybody's mouth water too. And by the end, they were like, all right, JJ, I get it. American food exists, and it's not just burgers. So what I cooked for them was something that was what I think is a great fall winter dish, which is chili. So chili, I think people will say, comes from Texas originally. And during the time when the United States didn't exist, under Mexico, or likely before Mexico, but because basically all beans in the world come from Mesoamerica and the United States, that was the genesis. Odd, because now Texas chili just has meat and no beans. Strange. But So I like it because there are so many varieties of chili. This is one of those things that everybody's family probably has a special recipe, right? And it can be used on baked potatoes, or it can be used like the weird thing they do in Cincinnati with it's sugary and it's on spaghetti, like the 3-way and the 6-way. I mean, you can have vegetarian chili, you can have chicken chili, white chili, green chili, corn chili. You can have all beans, you can have no beans, you can have all meat, you can have no meat, right? So, and it's simple and it's one pot. Let's be honest too. So I made the chili and they loved it, and it was salty and it was spicy and it was not sugary. And so I was pushing boundaries there. You're thinking, well, it's just chili. Sure, it's just chili, but baby steps here, you know? So I'm interested in doing that concept again, maybe not just at ALC Cooking Club, Fez, but other places. Just, you know, as part of my job or for on my own, because I just love cooking. All I do is cook. I come home and it's just cooking all night. So I'm not just a spectator from this. I'm totally rolling up my sleeves and I'm in it as well.
I'm gonna invite myself over next time I'm in Rabat.
Marhaba, ahla wa sahlan. Anytime, come on over.
Shukran. JJ, this has been totally enlightening. So great to hear your perspective, to hear from the perspective of the you are a representative of the United States government. So it's good to hear a little bit of what's going on in the actual culinary diplomacy sphere, the diplomatic culinary partnership. Yeah, I've just been super excited to learn all about this going on. Can't wait to see what's going on for the second Morocco-US Food Week. Can you share with our listeners how they can find out more about your work, about the work in the Rabat Embassy, and what's going to be coming the following year?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is to follow us on Facebook. Check it out, U.S. Embassy Rabat, Morocco. You search for that, it'll come right up. And, you know, we have stuff on there, not just about food, obviously, because there's lots of stuff happening. Sure, agriculture and food and entrepreneurship, but also music and art and science and what's going on with the economy and stuff. So yeah, there's some interesting things on there. So follow us on there, and I think shortly we'll be getting more information. We can lock in about U.S. Morocco Food Week. But again, it's not just about 1 week. Food doesn't happen in 7 days and then that's it. We're always looking for other smaller things along the way that we can do. So if anybody's coming to Morocco, of course, who has some culinary experience or a culinary idea, you got to just go ahead and you can message us on Facebook and they can put you in touch with me, the web people. Because that's really what we need here is ideas. And I'm just one guy, and I can't come up with all the great ideas in the world. This U.S. Morocco Food Week 2015 was just the culmination of a lot of conversations between Americans, Moroccans in the embassy, out of the embassy, even Moroccans outside of the United States. I mean, you've got the restaurant, the most famous Moroccan restaurant, I think, in the world. It's in San Francisco, and it's called Aziza. So it's a real product of a huge team effort, So any ideas are more than welcome. But yeah, check us out on Facebook.
Awesome. I just liked the page, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys are up to. So for your last question, JJ, what is your universal truth about food?
My universal truth about food is if you can't spend the time and the effort to eat something you're proud of that you find delicious, don't waste your time. For 5 years now, all my colleagues will tell you, I have eaten for lunch either apples, grapes, or bananas because I bike to work and I don't want to take some messy leftovers in my bag and have it slosh around and get everything dirty. And then I have to microwave it, which is weird, and then smell up the whole place, which is weirder. And then I've got to clean it, which I hate to do. And it's never as good as it is before, unless you're taking pizza the next day and heating it up in a frying pan. Actually, that's delicious. It's a waste. So for lunch, I'm just going to eat my simple fruit, which gives me, fills me up, gives me my calories, gives me some energy. And then when I go home, I can have my latte that I make right after work, and I read the New York Times. And then at night, after my cocktail, I will spend a couple hours and make an elaborate meal that I'm really proud of, that I find to be really delicious. if either go hard or go home. That's what I say.
That sounds great.
JJ, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all to our listeners for listening. You can connect with JJ and his work on Facebook, as we said, like the U.S. Embassy Rabat, Morocco. You can connect with us on our Facebook page, The Culinary Citizen. Now you can actually subscribe to us on iTunes, so that's exciting. Don't forget to leave a review of us if you've liked what you've heard. If you ever want to reach us, you can feel free to send us an email at culinarycitizen@gmail.com. If you have comments for JJ, you can send that to us too, and we will forward them on to him. So, JJ, thank you again. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you.
You guys do great work. I can't wait to check out the future episodes.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.